Thank you for listening. In this lecture series, we are discussing how the Bible created modern India. In the previous episode, I discussed the creation of Fort William College in Calcutta, where British civil servants began to be trained to administer the British East India Company's rule as deputy collectors, collectors, and other officers of the civil services that was at that time called Indian Civil Services, ICS, which after independence became IAS. And I pointed out that modern Indian vernacular languages were developed, that college was the hub, even if some of the translators didn't actually live there. But when they began to translate the Bible into Indian languages, that was the text that was read by civil servants who were coming from England to govern India. Now, it was the Mughal emperor who was defeated in the Battle of Buxar in 1764, who gave the Diwani or administrative authority to the East India Company in 1765. So suddenly, soldiers and traders who had come to India to make money for themselves and for their company, they have suddenly become rulers, judges. They are not trained as judges and they are not trained as administrators. Their objective is to make as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, and return to England to get married and become neo-nawabs. They have no vision or a sense of divine mission or call to bless India. That's why from 1765 to 1800, the rule of East India Company is the rule of an evil genie. That's not my word, that's Lord Macaulay's description, that the East India Company was a gang of public robbers. Clive himself had taken 20,000 rupees bribe when he intervened and replaced the Nawab of Murshidabad with his uncle. Following his example, all of the British rulers began to take bribes because we Indians were experts in giving bribes and manipulating our way. But this destroyed Bengal's economy and inflicted tremendous damage on Bengal. Charles Grant, whom we will meet in another episode, he was a servant of the British administrator agent in Murshidabad and saw the famine of 1769, 70, etc. That is the context in which the 100 years later, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, when he writes Anand Mat, the story is focused on that famine, of what's happening during that famine. And Grant is in India to make money. Later on, two of his daughters die within a week in Calcutta. His wife comes to terms with fundamental questions of life. Is death the end of life, or do we continue to live beyond death, and are we going to be judged by our Creator? She repents of her sin, she becomes a Christian, Grant becomes a Christian, he begins to pray, and he begins to feel that British rule in India is terrible, it needs to be reformed. India needs to be reformed. He goes back in 1790, and from 92 he gets really engaged in reforming East India Company, and it's partly his influence that this special training is created for civil servants in Fort William College. Now, Grant acquires sufficient stocks to become a leader in East India Company. And Charles Simeon, who is the father of modern movement called evangelicalism, a theological movement, he was in Cambridge. He was the one training missionaries such as Henry Martin, who come here as undercover missionaries because British Parliament had banned missionaries from coming to India. So they come as chaplains to East India Company. They are smuggled basically by ground. One of those 5 students that Simeon has mentored is Claudius Buchanan. Claudius Buchanan is made the provost. He basically runs the Fort William College. His job is to get the best teachers and to recruit high quality English young men, because the people who are coming from England to govern India are basically riffraff of English society. Young people who have nothing to lose by leaving England, but much to gain from ruling India if they can survive the heat, the dust, the climate, the mosquitoes, etc. They will return as very wealthy Englishmen while they had absolutely nothing in England. Buchanan feels that good Christian families must send good young men, intelligent young men, who will come with a sense of God's call to bless India. So his wife was often sick. He had to go back to England for her treatment, and he traveled around Christian universities in Europe, in Great Britain, and then went to churches, went to Christian conferences, challenging the Christians in England that you must not abandon India to these looters, the gang of public robbers that is East India Company. Christian families must send their best young people. So a number of pastors agree that yes, God wants to bless all the nations. He has given India to us, at that time mainly Bengal. God has given India to us so that God might bless India. But for that to happen, best of our young people should come. So many of the young men who start coming to India as civil servants are really sons, second or third son of a poor pastor in England. The older son will stay home, the younger son will go. The evangelicals built another training institution, Haileybury College, outside of London, where the young boys will be trained. And once they have become 18, 19, 20 years old, they will come to Fort William. And this is where the training of civil servants began in India. As I mentioned earlier, that the only book in many of our Indian languages that these civil servants had to study Indian languages was the Bible. But the Bible was also telling them about God's kingdom and how God's kingdom must come on earth, how God's will should be done on earth. That's the concept that Mahatma Gandhi later on takes up and begins to describe as Ram Rajya. But his Ram Raj is essentially Christ's view of God's kingdom, which had been taught 700 years before Jesus by prophet Daniel, that God will raise up his kingdom which will not crush nations, but transform nations into great nations and bring healing to the nations. This is what these civil servants begin to be taught. Most of the teachers in Fort William College are missionaries. William Carey, the father of modern missions, who lives in Serampur, he spends 3 days a week in Calcutta, in Fort William College, training languages to civil servants, training them ethics, building their character. Now, these young men who are going out to administer India are being prayed for. Their families are praying, pastors are praying that their sons will be protected from temptations, from sin, and that they will be just. Their church is praying. Their teachers are praying for them. And this begins to transform the character of Indian civil services. As they go back to a remote district in India as the deputy collector, Indians are bringing brides to them. Indians are bringing women to them. And here are young men. They know that their parents are praying that they might be pure, they might be holy, that they might serve, that they might have godliness with contentment, that they are content with their salaries, they are not extracting bribe. That's what begins to transform the character of Indian civil services, so that Indian civil services, by the time of independence, are perceived as the steel frame of governance. The politicians in Parliament, the board of directors in East India Company, they might be corrupt. They might be taking bribes. But India is being governed by young men who have been transformed by the power of the Bible to conform not to the world but to God and what God wants. So this is the Bible's great contribution, which we will develop in the book. You're invited to pre-order the book, How the Bible Created Modern India. It will have a whole chapter on the rise of the civil services in India. So when India became free in 1947, we inherited a civil service that was trustworthy, and it remained trustworthy until the 1970s, when corruption took over Indian civil services and Indian administrative services and police services, and India is once again singing. But the Bible is the spiritual force that successfully fought corruption in India from about 1820 to 1960, 70. There was very little corruption in the administration and governance of India. And that is where one can say boldly that corruption is curable. The Bible has cured it once, and the Bible can cure it again. Thank you very much. We'll continue this series.